Have you ever thought about how a single piece of infrastructure can do more than just serve us? What if it could actually shape us? Well, back in the 1920s, that's exactly what happened. A single strip of water didn't just connect two oceans, it kicked off this incredible process of unnatural selection, literally sculpting the design of ships and charting the course for the future of global trade. This is the story of how the Panama Canal became the architect of the oceans. So, picture this. It's the early 1920s, and the entire maritime world is at a massive crossroads. On one hand, you've got the old, familiar, but really grueling waltz of coal that's been powering everything. But on the other, there's this new, sleek, super efficient tango of oil that's promising a whole new world. And right in the middle is the Panama Canal, this golden bottleneck, forcing every single shipping company to pick a dance partner. It was a huge opportunity, but it also came with a whole new set of rules. So this brings us to the core of the problem. You see, every single ship, didn't matter where it came from or where it was going, had to play by a set of very rigid physical rules. The canal wasn't just a simple shortcut, it was more like a really demanding tailor for these giants of the sea. I mean, just think about it. You've got these massive concrete walls of the locks. There's no forgiveness here, no wiggle room. The maximum length was 320 meters, and the max depth about 26 meters. And these weren't suggestions, They were absolute limits that pretty much dictated every design choice for an entire generation of ships. But of all the numbers, this was the one. This was the most important. 33.53 meters. That was the maximum width, or what they call the beam. I guarantee you, every naval architect on the planet, from London to Tokyo, had this number practically burned into their brain. It was the hard cap, the ultimate constraint. And to see what this really looked like in practice, check this out. This is the HMS Hood, one of the biggest warships of its time. In 1924, it squeezed through those locks with less than a meter of clearance on either side. Can you even imagine the tension? That's not just sailing. That's a high-stakes, super slow-motion ballad where one wrong move could be a catastrophe. It was proof that even military might had to bend to the rules of civil engineering. Of course, this wasn't just an engineering puzzle. At the end of the day, it was all about the money. The canal created a whole new formula for how to make a profit, and it was all about balancing size against access. So the economics were actually pretty simple. The bigger the ship, the lower your cost per mile. Bigger was just more efficient. And the canal, well, it was basically a time machine. It let you skip that brutal 8,000 nautical mile journey all the way around Cape Horn. And that incredible efficiency is what made paying those huge tolls, like the nearly $17,000 the SS America paid in 1925, a totally worthwhile investment. And this economic push to get bigger just so happened to line up perfectly with the big technological shift to oil. And this slide illustrates it perfectly. Moving from coal to oil was literally like swapping a suitcase packed with heavy books for one full of feathers. Oil was way more compact, way lighter, and it freed up a ton of space and weight. And that extra room, it got filled with more cargo, which of course meant more profit. But it gets even more complex. A ship's draft, that's how deep it sits in the water, wasn't always the same. If you look at this map, ships coming from the South American route, loaded down with heavy raw materials like minerals and grain, sat much lower in the water. We're talking an average draft of 9.8 meters. That's a world away from a ship in the saltier, more buoyant Atlantic. The canal, with its freshwater system, became this great balancer, where all these different variables had to be equalized. And this is where the human element really shines. Captains developed this incredible intuition, a sixth sense for their ship's draft. They knew that being rejected at the locks meant they'd have to offload precious cargo, so they pushed the limits. Some of them even had unofficial codes painted on the hull, kind of like a secret naval barcode, to help them squeeze in every last ton of cargo without going over the line. So when you're faced with all these rigid rules and intense economic pressures, you've got to adapt. Ship design had to evolve. It went from being kind of an art to an exact science, almost like a Darwinian selection process, just played out in steel and rivets. So the big question is, how did they do it? How did naval architects respond? How did the whole industry adapt to these unforgiving rules? Well, the data tells a really fascinating story. And what the data shows is that a very clear sweet spot started to emerge. A massive 35% of the entire global fleet all converged on a length between 220 and 240 meters. That was the magic number. It was large enough to maximize your cargo and turn a nice profit, but just small enough to guarantee you'd have a smooth trip through the locks. In this chart really shows that design wasn't just guesswork anymore. It became a formula. This scatter plot shows an almost perfect correlation. We're talking an R-squared value of 0.92 between a ship's length and its beam. And get this, an incredible 40% of all ships fell into this really narrow width range of 28 to 31 meters, pushing right up against that 33.53-meter hard cap of the lock walls. So what does all this mean? Well, the whole drive was towards something we can call standardized optimization. While the length of ships was growing at about 2.3% a year and the beam at just 1.1%, look at displacement. That's the ship's weight. It was growing at a staggering 4.2% per year. Ships weren't just getting bigger, they were getting denser and heavier, packing more mass into a perfectly optimized frame. Now, to measure all this progress, the industry came up with a key metric: the Index of Utilization, or IUC. It was basically a simple score from 0 to 1 that measured how much of the lock's maximum available volume a ship was actually using. It became the ultimate scorecard for this process of naval natural selection, where only the most spatially efficient designs could really thrive. And the result? It was incredible. In just 2 years, from 1924 to 1926, the average canal utilization index for the entire fleet jumped by 12%. That is an incredibly fast evolution, and it just goes to show how quickly designers and shipowners figured out how to master the canal's rules. So how do we tie all of this together? Well, I think the best way to look at it is to think of the canal not as a barrier, but as the conductor of a global naval orchestra. In this orchestra, each dimension of a ship was an instrument. Length set the tempo, determining the speed. The beam provided the harmony, making sure everything was stable. And the draft, that added the depth, defining how much cargo you could carry. The canal was the conductor, ensuring no single instrument played too loud, and orchestrating this perfect symphony of global trade. And if there's one key takeaway from this entire period, it's gotta be this. In those crucial years, the world learned that, yeah, getting bigger is good, but getting smarter within a set of constraints, that's what truly marks the difference. True innovation isn't about limitless growth, it's about intelligent optimization. Which kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? The Panama Canal was a very visible, very concrete constraint. But it makes you wonder, what are the invisible canals, the hidden rules and limitations that are shaping the design of our technology, our economy, and our world today?